All kids out of the pool for Adult Swim. All kids out.
Adult Swim has come a long way since it began as a late-night programming block consisting of weird, creative, and low-budget cartoons aimed at older audiences. They've been instrumental in pushing the boundary for Western adult animation with all of the incredibly varied shows they've done. From simple yet very funny comedy series and parodies, to genuinely subversive works of art that explore themes well beyond comedy, delving into surreal premises, dark themes, or fantastic action, there's been a clear evolution in Adult Swim that's been crucial for their success as a brand. They've become so successful, in fact, that nowadays Cartoon Network as a channel has kind of turned into Adult Swim, since their programming now consists of the majority of the daily airtime on the channel, with Adult Swim now starting its programming at 5 p.m. rather than at night. One very interesting byproduct of this executive change within the network is that we're now seeing different types of series being aired on Adult Swim that were originally going to be aired on Cartoon Network, or that feel like shows that wouldn't have been associated with Adult Swim otherwise. For example, I've personally always wanted to see a DC show being made for Adult Swim, and we're currently seeing My Adventures with Superman being aired as an Adult Swim show. And while this is a cool fact, it's obviously not the same as a new DC animated series being entirely conceived and developed with the intention to air it on Adult Swim from the start, since My Adventures with Superman was actually originally announced as a Cartoon Network series. It was only later on that executive changes happened inside Warner Bros. Discovery, and it was decided that My Adventures with Superman would air during Adult Swim after it had expanded its programming time. This is why the show isn't really adult-oriented. Still though, I've always wanted DC to start making adult-oriented animated series, which is something they eventually did with shows like Harley Quinn and Batman Caped Crusader. But I always thought that Adult Swim would be the perfect place for that, since they are both owned by the same parent company. However, a few years back, there was an attempt at producing a DC animated series to air specifically as an Adult Swim show. This was revealed by comic book artist and cartoonist Evan Dorkin, who back in 2018 detailed on a Twitter thread how he created a series bible for a potential animated show based on a DC character alongside comic book artist Sarah Dreyer, and pitched the idea to Warner Bros. And Adult Swim for consideration. The series was going to be a comedic parody adaptation of the comic book series Kamandi, the Last Boy on Earth, written and illustrated by the legendary Jack Kirby. The concept for the comic book came about after DC tried to acquire the rights to produce a comic book series based on the Planet of the Apes franchise, and after failing to do so, DC editor Carmine Infantino assigned Jack Kirby to rework the concept into a more original story that DC could print. So Kirby conceived the idea of Kamandi, who is one of the last human beings living on Earth after it was devastated by the Great Disaster, a mysterious cataclysmic event that destroyed human civilization and eventually caused for most animal species on Earth to rapidly evolve and gain human-level intelligence, with the surviving humans being forced into slavery as they reverted into primitive thought, with some pockets of humans taking shelter on underground bunkers where they attempted to salvage civilization. Kamandi was raised as a kid by his grandfather on a bunker called Kamandi, which is where he got his name from. Dorkin and Dreyer's potential pitch put a comedic twist on the original concept from the comics. The main plot of the show would have seen Kamandi being manipulated by Brother Eye into traveling across the US with the promise of finding a woman who could potentially be Kamandi's girlfriend. Since in this show, Kamandi would have been depicted as a very hormonal teenager who desperately wants to get laid. So basically any normal teenager, since the thought of him being literally the last man on Earth is something that terrifies him, and his biggest wish is to find a partner. They describe the series as an adventure comedy with a mix of action and sci-fi, a sort of stylistic mashup between Jack Kirby, Jack Kerouac, and Cormac McCarthy, the author that wrote The Road, another post-apocalyptic story that is pretty rough. While the pitch obviously put a comedic twist on the concept and seemed more like a parody of Kamandi, Dorkin and Dreyer still made sure to be faithful to most elements from the original comic book series. It would have apparently tried to adapt most of the supporting cast of characters from its source material, such as Dr. Coolness, the anthropomorphic dogman companion of Kamandi, Tufton, the prince of the tiger tribe who became Kamandi's ally, Ben Boxer, a synthetic man artificially created to survive in the harsh conditions after the Great Disaster. Sacker, an intelligent mutant snake. Misfit, who's arguably Kamandi's most popular enemy from the comics, and many other characters from his original Kirby series would have been adapted throughout the show. Still though, as we've said, the artists behind this pitch managed to be both faithful to the source material, while also making interesting and creative new twists on the concept. For example, they thought about having the different animal tribes, reutilizing and appropriating old businesses and human establishments as the foundations of their different civilizations. The Tiger Tribe would have repurposed old Warner Brothers movie backlots, where they filmed movies set in medieval times, and they crafted a society with a feudal system based on their limited knowledge of history. Sacker would have reutilized a Walmart or Target-like chain for his own department stores, and Sacker himself would have seemingly physically appear in all of his stores throughout the US. Another example is their reinvention of Flower. In the comics, she is an ally and potential girlfriend to Kamandi, who was saved by him after she was being hunted down by the Puma Men. But in this pitch, she would have been reinvented as coming from a tribe of cannibals that eat their mates. But, of course, I think that the most notable new different take on Kamandi is having him be a hormonal teenager who desperately wants to get a girlfriend, but who, as Evan Dorkin put it, will never get laid, and would have constantly gotten cock-blocked throughout the show, and due to different circumstances. And while these types of sex jokes and humor isn't really my favorite sort of comedy, I still believe all types of comedy can be effective and potentially really funny if done properly. And, well, it was a pitch for Adult Swim, so these sort of jokes don't really surprise me, to be honest. The series Bible also detailed different potential episode ideas, like Kamandi being captured by a cult of human mutants that built a community by worshipping IKEA. The cult members would have all been named after IKEA products, and they would have tried to sacrifice Kamandi to a minotaur monster that lives in a huge labyrinth that was once an IKEA itself. Another episode idea would have adapted the gorilla tribe from the comics that worshipped Superman, or the Mighty One as they called him. Kamandi and his friends would have also gone to South America in another episode, and to fight against a Jaguar Sun cult that also owns a large hotel chain. The show would have also explored the different human bunkers across America, with this character named Commando from O Bunker being one of the series' main antagonists. A planned episode titled Princess Quest would have seen Kamandi and his team searching for a princess and a special weapon while being guided by Brother Eyebot, a small android that Kamandi built and that linked itself with the Brother Eye satellite. Kamandi gets excited about the possibility of finally meeting a new human and potential girlfriend. But the twist is that they're being misled by Brother Eyebot after he suffered a glitch and started acting like a dungeon master from a role-playing game, giving them false instructions. The most interesting planned storyline, in my opinion, would have revolved around their use of Brother Eye and OMAC. And during the series, Kamandi would have been informed by Brother Eyebot that his grandfather had died, when in reality, his grandfather was Buddy Blank, who disappeared after Brother Eye had tried to download itself into him, which transformed Buddy into the wandering entity known as OMAC, who in the comics is a superhero remotely powered by the Brother Eye satellite, into becoming a one-man army corps, working under the Global Peace Agency. This is a really nice connection that they made in the series Bible that also stems from the comics, given that OMAC was also created by Jack Kirby, and in his original series Kamandi was also directly related to OMAC since its conception. Kamandi was raised by his grandfather Buddy Blank in the underground bunker Kamandi after Buddy lost his powers and ability to transform into OMAC due to the Great Disaster. Kirby also detailed in his OMAC Silver Age series how the Brother Eye satellite was set up by the Global Peace Agency, an international organization established on Earth to try to prevent the Great Disaster. The same Great Disaster that occurred in the post-apocalyptic timeline of Kamandi. So the two series were purposefully linked together by Jack Kirby originally, and there are comics set in realities where the Great Disaster didn't happen, and Kamandi even grew up to be a superhero called Tommy Tomorrow. Ultimately, the show was sadly rejected by Warner Brothers and Adult Swim, with Evan Dorkin saying that one of the reasons he was given was that the show had too much action for a comedy show, and too much comedy for an action show, which is just baffling to me, considering that Adult Swim had already aired and produced original shows that had a combination of action and comedy, like Black Dynamite and Venture Bros. So I really don't understand that reasoning for them rejecting the show, and honestly, The biggest reason was most likely that Warner Brothers didn't have the faith that Kamandi could potentially be a popular franchise, considering the character isn't really well known. And Dorgan last mentions in his Twitter thread that after the Kamandi pitch was rejected, they worked for a new series Bible about another DC property alongside Bruce Timm, which was also seemingly rejected behind the scenes. And Dorgan and Dreyer later went on to write the Metalman shorts for Cartoon Network's DC Nation programming block. Speaking of Bruce Timm, as we all know, he played a big part in creating the DC animated universe throughout the 90s, and one of the earliest rumors from the DCAU was that Warner Brothers was considering creating an animated series based on Kamandi, and this was actually confirmed by Timm during an interview in the 21st issue of the Jack Kirby Collector magazine, released in October 1998. Where he said that the DCAU team briefly talked about the possibility of a Kamandi series after working on Batman the Animated Series and before Superman the Animated Series had been picked up for a full series, saying that they believed that Kamandi would make for a great kids TV show and that the original series was his favorite DC comic from Jack Kirby. Bruce Timm later elaborated on that old interview in a 2005 post on the Toon Zone forums, saying that the network executives at Kids WB were confused by Kamandi's premise and that they wanted to add a strong female character to the cast, which wasn't something that the original comic really had. So given that the crew wanted to remain as faithful to the source material as possible, they didn't want to compromise, and the network eventually lost interest, with them saying that it was probably for the best, since their Kamandi series would have apparently been way too violent for Kids WB. In the end, Kamandi never ended up appearing in the DCAU, and he eventually made his animated debut in Batman the Brave and the Bold. And while he still hasn't gotten his own full TV series, DC did release a showcase animated short focusing on Kamandi a few years back, which was honestly really good, and it did a great job in adapting the atmosphere and visual style of the Silver Age Kirby comics, and I would love to see a full Kamandi series in the style of that animated short. But what do you guys think? Would you like to see an adult-oriented Kamandi animated series? Whether it be more action-oriented like the showcase short, or more comedy-oriented like the rejected pitch from the early 2010s. I personally believe that the post-apocalyptic setting of Kamandi would be perfect for a great mature animated series, and I've really always wanted to see a full DC production on Adult Swim. But the closest thing that we've gotten so far were the Robot Chicken DC specials that we saw years ago, which were something special. Very special, that's for sure.
Now, was I supposed to fight Darkseid? Cause I'm a guy in a cat suit.
Man, I love Wildcat, but Darkseid is not a good match for him.